This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, we're being recorded. Purpose of this evening is just to spend a little bit of time just making sure that you're all confident when we get to the next stage of the program, which is participating in the enhanced support visits. And I just, want to be really upfront about what we are and aren't doing this evening. So I'm well aware that the Rotherham system leaders who are here this afternoon are experienced in going into other schools. You've done that lots of times. So this evening is not about telling you how to conduct a school visit or to behave when you go to another school. That's not what this evening is about. And nor is it about pretending that me, Alistair, the Sheffield system leaders that that you'll be shadowing, or indeed anyone else actually has all of the answers, because we don't. These are collaborative visits where we're exploring the impact of disadvantage on children's learning together, and hopefully arriving at some answers and ways forwards and conclusions together, rather than anyone saying, actually, I know what to do here. That isn't the case. We want to make sure that over this session, you go away being confident in the logistics of the visits. Quite often the questions that arise are, who does what, who organises what, when does this happen, how long should we spend doing something? So we'll go through the logistics of the visit first and hopefully sort of sort those things out and give you an opportunity to ask questions about that. Having said that, we recognise that you're experienced in undertaking school visits. What is really important is that we spend some time thinking about the context of these exploring disadvantaged visits within the context of this programme. So we're going to have a section of this evening where we're going to refer back to the original plan for the project and some of the important active ingredients that we feel must be present. And you guys play a really important role in that. So we really do want to spend some time thinking about that. Want to spend some time thinking about the actual visit itself. So when we go into schools, what activities are we going to undertake? What might we be looking to observe? What questions might we want to ask? And then I think the other really crucial thing that we do this evening is that we learn from each other. And I've been open from the start that I work in a secondary school. I am really looking forward to visiting some Rotherham primary schools with some expert primary colleagues I can lean on and learn from as well. So if we can also all view it as a learning experience this afternoon, that would be really great. So that's what we're going to do, and we'll get straight in. So thinking about the logistics. So I'm going to put up this slide, which you have seen lots of times before, because you're all on the main program, and we put this slide up at the end of at the beginning of everything we do. But what we're really thinking about this evening is this part of the program. It's the enhanced support visits for the 10 schools that are receiving enhanced support. And the capacity building part of the programme, which is further developing Rotherham system leader capacity. So as part of the enhanced support programme, there are 10 schools which Pam and Rachel have identified and signed these schools up, who are going to receive two. It says here half-day visits. I'll come on to that in a minute. In reality, those 10 schools are receiving a day of system leader support across two activities. One is an exploring disadvantage visit, which will take place May-June, which we're going to think about today, and also some follow-on support, which will take place later in the summer term. To enable those to happen, we're running the session this evening where we're doing some training for you, the system leaders who are shadowing and taking part in those exploring disadvantage visits and the follow-on support visits. There is an extra session at the end of June, which you may be just wondering whether you need to turn up to that as well, because it's on the bottom row. This session here is something that we agreed with Pam we'd run, and it's about capacity building, but you can very welcome to come to it if you like. But it's actually for the senior staff of the schools that are not here today, to have an opportunity to receive the same training. And again, that's just about growing capacity in Rotherham. Okay, so logistics. Let's go back to those two half-day, or what paper says two half-day activities. So the half-day support visit. Now, if you've done a visit to a school, you know that you can't do a visit in what you call half a school day. It comes with a bigger workload than that. So the half-day support visit realistically is going to look something like a 3 to 4 hour school visit. It's in the morning. And then the system leader, the Sheffield system leader, will spend about an hour writing a brief report, just summarising the exploration during the visit. The follow-on support is there, but again, in reality, whereas the initial visit is likely to be more than half a day in terms of work and time, the follow-on inverted commas half-day support is likely to be less than half a day. What we're proposing is the most practical way of doing that is probably an online meeting that focuses in on one or more of the areas from that initial exploring disadvantage visit. So setting these visits up. So where we are with this, we're almost there. The Sheffield system leaders have shared their availability with Rachel. Rachel is almost finished. We're just finalizing it. Rachel and I've had a few emails just to firm everything up. It's almost finalized the dates where those 10 schools are receiving the visits. And Rachel is matching yourselves against those visit dates. So we will be in a position, I think, with the next couple of days where we know exactly what dates all the enhanced visits are taking place on and which system leaders are shadowing taking part in each visit. And that will be communicated to you by Rachel. As I say, we're very, very nearly there with that. The next thing that will happen is that there's 4 Sheffield system leaders involved. They will send, and we've written a template email, but the Sheffield system leaders will send a template email to the schools that they're visiting about the arrangements for the visit, and they will copy you into that. So you're straight away involved in the communication about, what time do we turn up in the morning, where do we park, all that sort of thing. The visit itself then takes place, and in terms of the date, so that you're aware, I think the earliest visit is something like the 5th of May. And I think the latest visits are the week, the first and second week after the summer half term. So that's the sort of timescale we're working on. After the visit, the Sheffield system leader will produce a brief written report, as I said, and then the follow-up support meeting. Again, the Sheffield system leader will lead on that, copying you into any email communication with the school, and then obviously that follow-on meeting is arranged. If you're available and able to attend that, then you're obviously very welcome to do so as well. And actually, I'm sure your presence there would add value. In terms of what happens on the visit, we'll talk a bit more about this later, but as part of that initial email communication that the Sheffield system leaders will be sending and copying you into, there will be a suggestion on that email of the sorts of activities and the groups of people that we want to talk to and the activities we want to undertake during the visits. We're not going to ask schools to send us a ton of paperwork, because we'll say a bit more about this later, but this really isn't a visit where we're going into a school and making a judgment. So we don't need to be presented with loads of bits of paper to convince us of something or prove something to us. That's not what these visits are about. But we will ask them to send their pupil premium strategy. And we will also ask the school to put together and send us a schedule for the visit a week in advance of the visit. I mean, at the end of the day, the Exploring Disadvantage visit is there to support the schools we're visiting. So we want them to own the agenda for the visit. We want them to think about it and put together activities that they think are going to help them the most. Having said that, if when the schedule comes through to the Sheffield system leader and the system leader feels strongly that actually that we're missing some tricks here, then they'll have that dialogue with the school that we're visiting. So a good example of that might be if the school identifies attendance as being a barrier to learning for those who are socio-economic disadvantaged there, and there isn't a student panel consisting of low attenders. Well, perhaps that's an obvious thing that the school might not have thought of that would be useful to do. Talking to students who are low attenders in that scenario might give some insight as to how effective the current school strategies actually are with the students, and are there any other barriers perhaps that the school hadn't thought about. And remember, we're trying to explore disadvantage with the school, and so that activity would enable us to perhaps to explore some of the barriers in more detail. So we'll take the schedule that the school puts forward, but if we feel actually, do you know what, based on your priorities and the barriers that you've talked about, it might be sensible to include this. We'll have that dialogue with the school. So are there any questions at this point about just the practical logistics of either the visit, the support, the communication, all that side of things? Just look for hands up if there are any. Okay, no questions. Right. Okay, that's great. If something occurs later, please feel free to just to raise it. Let's move on. So the next thing we want to do is to think about the exploring disadvantaged visits in the context of this particular program. So as I said at the outset, you guys have got lots of experience of going to schools. It's not something new to you, but we just want to think about this program in particular, because some thought has gone into this program and some planning before it even got off the ground. There's a plan. I'm not sharing this plan because I want you to be able to read it all or to test you on it later or anything. But this is an implementation plan that was put together between Pam, Rachel, ourselves, and the Education Endowment Foundation for the support we're providing. And the plan manifests itself in terms of the activities that we're delivering. The core program, the enhanced support visits, and the system leader training that's happening today. But what I want to talk to you about in particular is the second column on this implementation plan, which you may not be able to read it, but talks about the active ingredients. So, what are the essential features of this intervention as a whole that we have to have in place for it to be successful? Worded differently, what activities and behaviours will we see if the program is working? So, just thinking about active ingredients a bit more before coming back to this project in particular. I'm pinching this analogy from someone else on a training course I gave because I thought it was just so good. But we were talking about active ingredients as the kind of the essentials. These have got to be present, otherwise it doesn't work. And he said, well, actually, what I think about baking powder and the active ingredients of baking powder. And I just think this is a brilliant analogy because if I want to make a cake or some scones and I want them to rise, what I do is I go rooting around in my baking cupboard at home, and I look for a little small cylindrical plastic container that contains white powder. And I just put some of this white powder that comes out of this cylindrical plastic container into my mixing bowl, and the cake turns out rising. And when I go shopping, if I'm looking for baking powder, for stuff that makes my cake rise, I'm looking for little cylindrical tubes full of white powder. But actually, it isn't the fact that I'm taking the white powder out of a little cylindrical tube, or the fact that it's white powder that is making my scones or my cake rise. It's the fact that there's some active ingredients in there that, there's some, I'm at the limit of my science knowledge here, but apparently it's sodium bicarbonate and acid. And those two ingredients together make our cakes and our scones rise. And that's the active ingredient. That's the really important thing in baking powder. It's nothing to do with the shape of the little tube it comes in or the fact that it's white. And we need to think in a similar way about this program. It's not the fact that we've got a sequence of modular courses that makes things work. Anyone can do that, but it's the active ingredients underlying that are present, that we must be present alongside that for the project we believe to be successful. So we want to think about active ingredients for this project, and I'm going to put you in breakout rooms in a couple of minutes to do this. So I've just lifted these three boxes from that implementation plan I showed you a second ago. I'm just going to give you a minute to read the initial problem or challenge that we're trying to address, and also the final outcome, and then we'll come back to the active ingredients in the middle. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the chat, if I could hopefully do this, I'm going to put in the chat a bunch of, I've basically copied the active ingredients into the chat. And what I'm just going to ask you to do is, if you could go into the chat, copy the list of active ingredients that I've just pasted in there with the same ones that are in that box on the slide, onto a Word document or a notepad or something, just so that you've got access to those when I put you in breakout rooms in a moment. I'll just give you a second to do that. So if you can just go into the chat. And
John, I can't see anything in the chat.
Right, I will try posting that again. All I want to just make sure is that when you're in your breakout rooms, you've got access to them. So let me just try posting that again. Okay, is that any better?
I can see it now.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for flagging that up. So if you can just cut and paste that into a Word document. I think the formatting has got a little bit mangled, but I think it should be okay to read. So, you know, for us, what's really important is we've got good engagement. You know, the schools see relevance to their context and make a long-term commitment. It's really, we don't think this will be successful if the wrong staff and system leaders are involved. You know, it's important for us that system leaders represent the cohort of schools that are taking part, and that the leads who are attending the program, you know, we've used the words capacity and clout. You know, they've got time and space to do something with this in their school, and also the authority to engineer change, in their school. Collaborative nature of the work, non-defensive, open and honest dialogue, for us really, really important. If we're not that, then this won't be successful. Correct identification of schools to engage in the more intensive program. It's also essential, we feel, that the program imparts specific knowledge to school leaders in relation not only to evidence-informed approaches, that's important, but also the way in which those are implemented implemented in schools. You know, you want to implement something, well, implement it properly. That's really important. And also that as project leads, you know, we're modeling the implementation cycle, you know, and we're designing the project to support facilitation, ongoing support. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, and I'm going to ask you to reflect on where as system leaders, where do you fit? You know, which part of the active ingredients are you bringing to the table? You know, as system leaders, what's it really, really important? What does this tell you that's really, really important about the way you behave in schools, the way we go about doing the exploring disadvantaged visits? And then we'll come back together in about 10 minutes and we'll take feedback from the groups. So you've got 10 minutes there. You can introduce yourselves to each other if you don't know each other. I imagine some of you do, but then have that conversation about, as system leaders in this project, where do you fit in with the active ingredients? You know, what is it really important that you do? How should your behavior be to support us making sure that these active ingredients are present throughout the exploring disadvantaged visits? So I'll stop sharing and put you in breakout rooms. Any questions about what I'm asking you to do? Excellent. Okay, we'll put 2 breakout rooms. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Screen share again. So if you don't want yourself captured, just mute your video. So I think a couple of key messages about the visit, just to, and perhaps labouring the point, but it's really, really important that it is collaborative, and we're going into these schools to work alongside the senior leaders to explore disadvantage in their context. Specifically, we're exploring how socioeconomic disadvantage impacts on the learning of pupils. And we want to be thinking, exploring with the school, how they're addressing those barriers, and, you know, perhaps how effectively is that strategy working? And I think I can't remember, was Jane or Ian referred to the 3-year strategy. Well, we are in a position now where everyone should have a pupil premium strategy that is tiered. We've done that thinking. We've done that, and we've got something written down on paper. But we also want to go in and really help the school explore the extent to which, is it just a paper strategy? Does it feel like a bolt-on? I know our pupil premium strategy 2 or 3 years ago felt really like a bit of a bolt-on extra. It wasn't necessarily integrated into the whole school priority. So, these are some things that we could look at with schools. And, if you go into the school thinking, right, whatever happens, I'm doing it with the school. I'm not doing it to the school. I think the active ingredients are more likely to be present. So that's what it is. Just again, I may well be laboring this point, but it isn't a clipboard activity. We are not going into a school to try and ask awkward questions or catch anyone out. It's also not a visit where I would expect the school to be producing reams and reams of paperwork or data. As Jane said, actually data at the moment is really problematic anyway, because the last few years we're not comparing like for like. But I'm sure you've been into schools where people have plonked a folder of pieces of paper in front of you for you to look at, and you're sitting there thinking, well, what on earth am I supposed to do with this? And with the time I've got, how on earth can I be expected to, draw any sort of conclusions from this file of paper? We're not wanting that. We expect the school to have looked at their data and thought about this already. They might have some pertinent data capture that they want to share with us, but this isn't an accountability exercise. We're there to help the school explore the impact of socioeconomic disadvantage on learning. I'm just going to ask for comments in the chat for this one. So we want to do the visit with schools. So one thing we are going to ask, and this will be in the original email communication, we're going to make clear to the schools that we're visiting that we would really like them to organise a day so that the lead for disadvantage, or the relevant senior leader, is able to spend as much as possible of the visit with you and the system leaders that are doing the visit. And I just wonder if people could perhaps just pop their thoughts into the chat about what the benefits of us asking schools to do that might be, just in the context of what we're trying to achieve. Just give you a moment. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Helen. Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks, Kate. Interesting, the word ownership's come through in a couple of answers, a couple of responses there. Fantastic. Yeah, great. Really perceptive comments. There are no right or wrong answers to this. I think your comments that have come through there are captured in the bullets, the suggestions here, but it's a share. We want it to be a shared experience. This is a collaboration if we do it together, and we can explore things together. So one of the things you'll do is meet with the senior leaders early in the day, and it may well be, for example, that they say something like, well, we think students' metacognitive abilities are lower than we want them to be, our disadvantaged pupils, so we're really focusing on developing these in lessons. Well, that would be a great thing for you and the disadvantaged lead to have as a almost lesson observation focus when you're going into classrooms to experience lessons. But doing that collaboratively is the way to go. I think important that during the day you've got an opportunity to just openly share reflections with the lead in the school. You don't want there to be any surprises at the end of the day. You don't want to be doing a final feedback to the head, for example, at the end of the day, and therefore to be some curveball that you've chucked in that is just a complete surprise to everyone. Just coming back to the one about sharing reflections during the day, I did a visit to a school about 18 months ago, and the disadvantaged lead was convinced that the lack of cultural experiences for disadvantaged kids was a major barrier to their learning. So, she thought, and she was thinking about, well, I need to organise more trips to the theatre, and actually we're a long way from the beach. Children don't go to the beach. Once we organise this sort of experience for the students. I thought, well, that's interesting. And all of the student panels I had, I asked kids questions about whether they'd been abroad, whether they'd been to the theatre, whether they'd been to the beach. But the senior leader was in the room with me, and actually, and I know we only spoke to a subset of pupils, but pretty much all of the pupils had done all of those things. And the senior leader actually, we shared the reflection together, and the senior leader sort of owned that reflection as well. That actually, perhaps she made an assumption about that lack of cultural experiences. Now, she didn't leave the day going, right, I've got it all wrong, but we left it as, right, okay, we've both noticed this, haven't we? This might be something you want to explore in more detail after I've gone. So that having her present for those conversations was really impactful. And it meant that when we were doing the feedback at the end of the day, she was able to own that reflection and feed it back to the head teacher as well. I think when we come to that bit with the feedback at the end of the visit, if you can use the word we rather than I in the feedback, and if there's a way of involving the senior leader that spent the morning with you and giving some of that feedback, I think that's really powerful as well in helping the school own the learning from the visit. Okay, so thank you for the comments in the chat. As I say, I think you captured things pretty well. So there's a list here of suggested activities that we might undertake during the day. I think, realistically, you're going to be in school with the system leader for 3 or 4 hours. It might not be possible to do all of these things. We'll think a little bit more about what we might be looking for in each of these activities in a minute. But I'm just going to revisit a slide which I think Alistair showed with you at the last module that we did, the module, which was just about the levels of culture, and I just think this is quite important to reflect on a little bit before we start thinking about the sorts of questions we might ask people and what we might be interested in observing. But if you go into a school, you are going to see and notice some tangible things. You're walking around the school, you'll see examples of pupils' work. You'd expect to hear staff talking to children. We might observe things about fresh starts children get. We might observe things about the expectations staff have got of all pupils. Our disadvantaged pupils, are they being set the same work? Are the same expectations of all students there? I think as we go down the slide there, values and beliefs and underlying assumptions, I think we've got to work a little bit harder to get there, but they are really, really important. So, values and beliefs, those are things that you might hear articulated if you ask people about their role in school. What is your role in supporting, in addressing the barriers that socioeconomic disadvantage causes on pupil learning? Some of the internal biases people might have, and that might actually undermine the school approach. There's something written on paper, but actually some members of staff might have got these internal biases going on. You're only going to get to by asking questions and doing a little bit of probing with staff. But again, not trying to catch people out, but just actually trying to explore how things are in school and what people actually think. So, an example of that is if you're, talking to a teacher, and one question which we'll come to later is really insightful one to ask. You say, if school had more money, or you had a magic wand and you could do X, you could do something, you could choose to do something to improve the outcomes of disadvantaged students. And, if your classroom teacher comes back and says, well, what I would do, it's all pastoral, isn't it? So I would invest in loads more pastoral support. There's something there that tells you that teacher hasn't really necessarily, it might need a bit more exploring, but hasn't necessarily got a complete handle on the impact that they have controlling what happens between 9 in the morning and 3:30 in the afternoon in their classroom, which actually is the part of this, is the controllable part of school that we've got most control over. So it's those sort of questions you can ask people that might get a little bit further down this sort of a bit lower, below the surface, down below the tip of the iceberg, to get a sense of what people's values and beliefs and perhaps some of their underlying assumptions might be in school. So some good questions that you might want to think about asking everyone, no matter who you are talking to. You want to get to the bottom of whether there is a shared understanding of the barriers facing learning as a result of socioeconomic disadvantage. So that the school has written a strategy. That strategy is predicated on, well, these are the barriers we think we've got, and then we are putting in place certain things to address these barriers. Now, that there will be a paper document that says all of that. To what extent is there that shared understanding across all staff? One of the things you might find is actually it's pretty apparent that not all school stakeholders have contributed towards the writing of that strategy. Talking to teachers, what do you think the barriers facing learning are for the socioeconomically disadvantaged students? They might come up with stuff which is completely different from what's on the school pupil premium strategy. That can tell you that perhaps that there needs to be a bit better messaging in the school, but it could also actually be, well, that's interesting. Have senior leaders considered that barrier that teacher has identified? I think really, really important to try to get to the bottom of the extent to which all members, all stakeholders of the community, teaching assistants, senior leaders, teachers, early career teachers, your influential middle leaders, own their contribution in removing those barriers. School can only control what it can control, and that's generally between 9 and 3:30. But everyone in school's got a role in addressing those barriers. And do people understand their role, and do they really own that role? What opportunities perhaps are being missed? And I think something there as well about trying to probe a little bit into the expectations of all students. Is there that underlying bias where actually we're not expecting quite as much of our disadvantaged students? And conversations with teachers, looking at student work, talking to teaching assistants in particular, will give you some good insight there. So I've now got a bunch of slides for each stakeholder group. I'm just looking at the time. We've got, I think, plenty of time here. What I'd like to do is I'm going to put you back into breakout rooms just for 5 minutes this time. And I'd like you to just pick a couple of those groups, stakeholder groups out, and think about, or if it's the bottom two are activities, aren't they? Observing lessons and observing social time. Pick out a couple of those and have a think about, well, what questions might you ask? And what might you be interested in observing or paying closer attention to? That I don't think there are right or wrong answers. This is a situation where we can learn from each other. When we come back from the breakout rooms, I've got some slides that have got some answers, some questions that we could ask or some things that we could observe. And at that point, what I'll do is then at that point is take comments from yourselves based on what you've discussed in your breakout rooms, if you think you've got something to add. But I'm viewing this last part as a place where we can learn from each other. So I'll just let you make a note, just write down just jot down the groups that you might particularly be interested in talking about. We've got a few more people, so I'm going to